Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Dev Marketer channel. We're going to continue on with our series of Laravel new features for Laravel 5.4. The last video we talked about kind of all the small features, and I know it was a long video, but we talked about all the small features, then through the changelog and stuff like that. Now from this video onward, I'm going to dive into more detail about a specific feature in each video. Okay, so we're going to talk about features we didn't talk about in the first video, but we'll go into more detail about them. And these are kind of features that require a little more explanation. Now today's first, the part 2 of the series, the first more detailed part, we're going to talk about Laravel Mix. Now in the past you guys might have used another package called Laravel Elixir. And Laravel Elixir has now been kind of, I guess, depreciated in favor of the new version of Laravel Elixir, which is called Laravel Mix. So Laravel Mix is an official package now, and it's part of the Laravel family. And it's going to be pulled in whenever you do an npm install on a new Laravel project. So what I want to do is show you guys how to use Laravel Mix and also kind of show you the differences if you're used to using Laravel Elixir, what you need to know that's different. So to get started, we got to get into our project. So let's go ahead and open this up. This is our new Laravel 5.4 project, the same thing we did in the last video. This is basically a fresh install of Laravel with the Laravel new command, okay? Now, when you first open up this project, you might notice something different if you went to, if you're familiar with the old versions of Laravel. There used to be a file down here called gulpfile.js, and that's gone, okay? Now, gulpfile.js was the Laravel, well, it's the Gulp, it was basically the file for Gulp. Laravel Elixir was built on top of Gulp, so it allowed us to process all of our CSS, or our Sass or our less files into CSS. And it allowed us to process our JavaScript. It allows us to do cache busting on the server to, to get new files to keep them from getting cached. Allowed us to do all these different functions, but it was all through Gulp. Well, now that's all changed, and we're no longer using Laravel Elixir used Gulp, but we're not doing that anymore. Laravel Mix now is built around Webpack. Okay, now it has a lot of the same functionality. So I'm going to show you guys how to use all of it, but it's now built inside of Webpack. So we no longer have a gulpfile.js, we have a webpack.mix file. So down here at the bottom of your root folder, under above yarn.lock, you'll have this webpack.mix.js. This is what it looks like. So you can see inside of here we pull in Laravel Mix, and then this is where we configure Laravel Mix to do whatever we want it to do. So we've got the basic commands like you might be used to. You can tell it to compile JavaScript with the .js command. We give it the resource file where it should, where the reference file is, and then where we want it to compile the new version into. So after we compile all of this, it gets thrown into the public/js folder. Same thing goes for Sass. This is our Sass file, and we just use the .sass directive. This is where our SCSS file is, and then it compiles it into CSS in the public/CSS directory, okay? I'm not going to go into, if you don't know what to do with these are basically preprocessors. I don't want to get into it because I think most people know how to use it, but maybe I'll do a future video just explaining why you want to do this. Just let me know if you guys are looking for that information down in the comments. Okay, so this is basically, this webpack.mix file is where you're going to configure Laravel Mix and tell it what you want it to do. So when you run Laravel Mix, this is what it's going to do. So in this case, it's going to do two things. It's going to go out, compile JavaScript file. It's going to go out and compile the SCSS file into CSS, and then it's going to call it a day. It's going to be done. Okay. Now, if you wanted to add extra functionality, you can tie additional functionality onto here, and you can just keep chaining it as much as you want to customize it for your needs. And I'll talk about some more of these commands here in a minute, but I want to show you guys really how to use it first, and then we'll come back and talk about customizing. Okay, so this is where you would customize it. This is where you configure it. If you want things in different locations, this is where you do it. And that's different. This is basically your new version of gulpfile.js if you're familiar with that. Okay, now over here in our package.json, also at the root of your folder, you can see all of your dev dependencies. You notice that Gulp is no longer there. We're using Webpack instead. And above that, you can see this scripts object, and this includes all of the scripts that Laravel Mix includes out of the box, okay? So we got 4 of them by default. The first one is the dev script. The dev script is obviously designed for development. This runs Laravel Mix one time. It's similar to your gulp command. So if you ever just ran gulp, This is basically the equivalent to Gulp in the new Laravel mix world. Okay, so it does one normal run. It runs through whatever you've told it to do in the webpack.mix file. It runs through it one time, and then it's done. There's no minification. There's nothing. Now, the other version of dev is obviously production. So if you come down and you run the production script does the same thing dev does. It's a one-time script, but it will minify all of your files for you along with doing everything else. Okay, so that's the difference between dev and production. The one thing I think is worth noting that confused me is I naturally assumed that production was also going to, in addition to compiling everything, I also thought it was going to create map files, source map files, and I thought it was going to do cache busting, because I'm pretty sure that was default in Laravel Elixir. I'd have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure I know the map files were default, and the caching wasn't. I don't think the cache busting wasn't. So that was extra. But anyway, I thought that it included that. I just want you guys to know that it doesn't, because that confused me. If you want that functionality, you have to customize it in the webpack.mix file. And I'll show you how to do that later on. But I just want to note that when you run production, you're only really getting minification, which, not that that's a bad thing. It's a good thing for production, but I just want to note that that's really the big difference. If you want those other features, you actually have to tell it to add those features in your webpack.mix.js file, okay? So that's the difference between dev and production. They're both one-time runs, and they just compile everything, whatever's in your webpack.mix file. Dev does it normally, production minifies it, and that's basically the difference. Now, these other two commands, we'll talk about hot first of all. Hot allows for hot swapping. Hot swapping would be good if you're compiling view components and you don't want to change everything else on the page. You just want to recompile the view component. You can do npm run hot, and that'll do the hot swapping. And then the watch command is the same thing as what we were familiar with if you ran gulp watch. This is basically the equivalent to that. It watches all your dependency files. If anything changes, you make a change and you save it. It'll recompile everything, and it's much faster because it's only compiling the deltas, the difference, and not everything all over again, which is good. Because one thing you'll notice, and we're going to go run it here in a second, one thing you'll notice with Webpack is I actually think it's slower than Gulp. Some people think it's not, but in my experience, maybe it's because it runs through npm, but it's slower on my computer than Gulp was. Gulp was pretty fast. Okay. So let's go ahead and run these commands. Make sure you're inside of your project folder when you run them. Make sure you've ran npm install already for your project. You should have this node modules folder over here if you've ran npm install. If you haven't ran npm install before on this new project, you're going to have problems because it hasn't pulled in any of the dependencies that Laravel Mix requires. It's not going to have any of the, for example, the Bootstrap Sass, the Vue, Axios. None of those files have been brought in. So you need to run npm install first on your project before you can run any of these other commands. Okay, so to run the command, let's go ahead and run the dev command just from the get-go. We'll run npm run dev and click enter. And this is going to compile everything one time, no minification. And you can just see kind of how long I'm not going to speed it up, but that's how long it took. And you can see that it pulled all of our fonts. These are fonts from Bootstrap. It compiled our JavaScript, our CSS, and we have this new file called mixmanifest.json, okay? So that's kind of the new output. I'm going to be picky here, but I actually preferred the output for Laravel Elixir. I thought that was a better output. Let's go ahead and take a look at these files real quick, okay? So if you guys look at the webpack.js file, you can see it takes our app.js file that is in our resources assets JavaScript and then puts it into our public/js, okay? So resources assets JS app.js, it compiles this file, which you can see requires bootstrap.js. It has our Vue components. It creates a Vue app. And let's be looking at bootstrap.js. You can see it pulls in Lodash, it pulls in jQuery, it pulls in the JavaScript for our Bootstrap Sass. It pulls in Vue, it pulls in Axios, and it configures our Axios headers, okay? So all of this code is going to be pulled from all the various different places and put into one JavaScript file, okay? And that JavaScript file now lives in the public folder under JS and app.js. So this now is the configured version, the compiled version of all of that stuff. This includes jQuery, it includes Axios, includes all these libraries in one JavaScript file. And so this means that when we go to import this on the front end of our website, if we in the views, we only have to make one HTTP request for the JS file, one for the CSS file, and we're done. And that's going to save a ton on speed and deliverability and all sorts of other things. It's just better all the way around. And that's one of the big benefits to integrating Laravel Mix into your workflow is the performance advantages you get with this, okay? And then if we go into our app CSS file, you can see we get everything here as well. Just kind of pull through it real quick. This is all of the bootstrap and everything is inside of here, okay? So you don't need to pull it from a CDN or anything like that. Okay, we have a new file here for our fonts. It pulled in as well. So now real quick, I just want to show you guys how you're going to integrate this into your project if you're not aware. Let's go and take a look at let's create a view file, or just go into our resource views, and we'll just look at our welcome file here, which is the default page in Laravel. And obviously we've got some inline styles. Let's go ahead and kill the inline styles. We don't need those. And we don't need our fonts either, because the fonts are inside of our CSS file now. Because if we go to our, let's see, resources, assets, sass, and then app.css, you can see here that we pull in the fonts already into the SCSS, so they're already included. We don't need to make a separate call. Okay, so all we need to do now to integrate our new style sheet, in fact, let's go ahead and save this. Let's take a look at it before and after. So let's call in Laravel 5.4 .dev. Oh, I've spelled it wrong. Okay, there we go. So this is we killed all those inline CSS. There's no CSS in here. So now what we can do is let's go ahead and pull in our file. So we're going to say link, href, and we're going to use the asset helper. So we'll do asset, and this basically goes into our public folder. So whenever we do asset, we just need to give it a string of where to go once it's in the public folder. So in this case, we're going to link the CSS. So we just need to do css/app.css. So css/app.css. And that's going to link in the CSS file that has all the configured stuff. So now we do have to do type equals text/CSS. And then relation is style sheet. Like that, okay? So now this should pull in. If we refresh, you can see we're getting all the bootstrap stuff. Change the background. It pulled in our CSS file correctly, okay? So we're already getting that functionality, so that's good. Now we could do the same thing for our app.js. We'll just come down here and we'll just say script source equals, and then we'll do asset js/app.js, and that'll pull in all the JavaScript stuff. We got to do type, I think. Oops. There we go. Okay, so now we've got that, and you won't notice any difference, so I won't bother wasting your time. Now what we can do is, let me go through and just show you guys how to change something. Before we get started, let's run the watch command. So let's do an npm run watch. And I just want to show you guys how the watch command works. Where are we? Oh, I spelled wrong. Okay, npm run. I spelled it again. Run watch. And now it's going to compile everything. We'll get our output, and then we'll be ready to watch. Okay, so here we go. We've got this compile. You'll notice there's no new command line because it's watching. So what we can do now is let's go through and change one of our files. So we'll go into our app.scss. Let's go ahead and just change the body color. We're going to change the background color to be cyan. Okay, so we'll change that color like that. And then if we go back over to our terminal, I saved the file, and it should have just automatically reran. That's what it did here. Okay, so it reran our file, and now if we refresh, we automatically get the changes. Okay, and you can see this happens instantly. So we change it to red. You can, let me just come through. I'm going to save the file. I'm going to save the file. And normally you'll get a command here, but I have, because of our videos, I turned Do Not Disturb on. Let me just show that again. So let's do it one more time. We'll do yellow. I'm going to do a save. Up here we'll get, it says build successful. I just turn those notifications off. And over here, if I refresh, you can see it changes yellow, okay? So we're able to change these on the fly. It's recompiling our CSS, and then we're able to take advantage of that in the project, okay? So hopefully that makes sense, guys. Let me go over some customizing features, but this is basically, these are the basic features for using Laravel Mix. You can go ahead and probably use the basics right now, but if you want to stay tuned, I'm going to show you guys how to customize it a little bit further. One thing that I wanted to mention as well with the JavaScript, one of the advantages to using Webpack on the JavaScript side is that this now supports ES 2015. So if you guys want to use that, you now can take advantage of that inside of your projects, and Webpack can compile those, which is awesome. It also supports Vue, which is also really good, obviously because we use Vue here. So all that's given to you out of the box. Now let's go ahead, and I told you that all the customizing happens in our Webpack.mix file. So let's go ahead and take a look at this, and let's just take a look at some of the things that we can do. So the first thing that we can do is we can actually do you can do a combine method. So we already know that you can compile JavaScript with the .js, and of course if you want to do multiple ones, it doesn't really, I don't know why you'd want to do multiple, but if you want to do multiple, you can obviously do them here. The first item is the main file, the path to your main file. The second parameter is going to be where to output file. Okay, so in this case, we went to our resource folder. This is where the base file is that we want to compile, and then the compiled version we want to put into our public folder. So you just want to follow that same system with all of these. Now you could do multiple CSSs as well. You just add .sass. Also, if you're not using Sass, you're using less, you can obviously just do .less, and Webpack will support less, so you can just do .less, and this obviously has to be a less file in order for it to work. Just want to let you guys know you can use Sass, you can use less. You can also combine files, so if we do a combine, you can give it an array of the files to combine. So importing them in the file, you could say take your bootstrap. So resources / assets / sass / bootstrap .scss, and then you could combine that to, let's say you're using, I don't know, Bulmy. Not sure. Again, it's a bad idea to do this, but you could then combine those together, and you can do as many as you want, so you can just keep chaining these. It'll take all those files and combine them into one file. So that's another thing that you can do if you want to do that command. The other thing you can do is the copy command. This is really good with node modules. So for example, you can add .copy, and you could pull something from node modules out. So you're gonna, obviously your node modules are brought into this folder. So you could take your node modules and you could grab, I'm not recognizing any of these files, asap.js. Let's just say we want to do that one. So we could do asap/asap.js, and then you could move that to the public folder. So public/js/asap. You don't need to do that, actually. You can just do that. And it will now grab this asap file.js file, pull it out of your node modules, and copy it into your public directory. So that's another thing you can do, is you can do this copy command. That can sometimes be useful. We talked about combine. The other thing you can do is source maps. So you can do, this was default before, and I mentioned that earlier on in the video. Source maps were configured by default with Laravel Elixir. If you want source maps in Laravel Mix, you have to configure it here in your webpack.mix file. So just go ahead and tell it to do source maps, and it will automatically add source maps to your project as well. Another command that you can do, and keep in mind all these are chainable, so you can do as many as you want. You can also disable notifications. And disable notifications will disable the notifications we saw that came up here when it finished compiling. So this will disable it on the Laravel Mix side. I had disabled it on my computer side using Do Not Disturb on the Mac, and that was just because if I get text messages, I didn't want them to chime in on the screencast, so I turned that off before the screencast started. But the downside is it also silences any of the other ones. And that's basically it. The other one you might want to use is extract. So with extract, this is if you want to do, if you're doing the cache busting, which I haven't shown you yet. Let's talk about that real quick before we get too deep into this. If you want to do cache busting, which is basically to add different versions to your files when they're compiled, what this will do is you can do .version. And .version will basically tell it to take all these files and create specific versions for them. So with the specific versions, they'll basically have a hash at the end of them. And then that hash, it's a random hash. And that way, your browser, if you're working on a server, it'll feel like it's a new file that it hasn't downloaded before. And it will basically disable the cache. It'll kind of override the cache because the browser will then install the file because it thinks it's a different file. So this creates basically a unique name for your file when you do .version. Okay, so let me just show you that real quick. We're going to go ahead and click Save. So here we go. I went ahead and ran it again. Here you can see all of our font files now have this hash at the end of them. This is a random string. This is our app JavaScript file, now has this random string inside of it. And the CSS file has a random string. And if you go over here, you'll notice the CSS file now is that nasty long CSS file. And the JavaScript now is the nasty long JavaScript file name. And so this is really nice because now, let's say we run it again, and these numbers are going to change. And so the computer's going to recognize that as a new file, and it's going to disable caching. It's going to kind of a way to override caching. So now these are different numbers, and these have all changed. So every time we recompile our CSS and JavaScript, it's going to basically generate a new file name for that project to get around caching. This is really good on production servers. However, it causes one major headache. And this actually also ties into what the mix manifest file does. I mentioned earlier on, I wanted to tell you what it does. And this basically helps tie together, it tells Laravel that this long nasty name belongs to the app.js file, and the app.css is this long name, and it keeps track of those for you. So that's the benefit of mix.manifest, just so you see that. Make sure you don't delete this file. Just keep it running, let it just sit in your public folder and do its job. Okay, so now we're gonna have one problem. So everything's saved. Let's go back and look at our project in the browser. Let's refresh. You'll notice we lost all of our styling. And if we actually run and inspect here, and we go to the console, you'll see we get some 404 errors. And we're getting errors when we're trying to load the app.css and app.js file. Well, the reason we're getting those errors is because those files don't exist anymore, right? There is no app.css and app.js. Look here. It's app.32af whatever.css, okay? So we're going to get a 404 error because it can't find it. So this makes it, theoretically very annoying. If we go over to our welcome page, we now would have to copy this in order to load it. So we'd have to do 32af1 4d 0 dafcc b6a ab9 3. Okay, so now I can save this. Now that it's got the right file number and I refresh, it's able to successfully load it, okay? So you have to match those file numbers. Well, that's obviously a huge pain in the butt in order to do that, especially if you're running these all the time and you're recompiling them. That just isn't gonna work, right? So luckily, Laravel has a new command that makes it a lot easier when you're using these version numbers. Instead of calling asset, you wanna call mix, okay? So this new mix command, what you need to do is you just give it that base file that it should be without the version number in it, and it should automatically figure out, it uses this mix manifest file to figure out what the other name for it should be, the long numeric name, what this long name is, and it just fills it in for you automatically. So let's go back over here now and refresh. You can see we're still attached to it, and it's still having a hard time finding the JavaScript file because we haven't updated the JavaScript down below. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. Let's come down here. Let's change asset to mix so that it can find the version number. And let's go back and refresh. And now we're getting a different error because of CSRF tokens, but it's found the files. If we go to sources, you can see in the JS, it's able to find it. We've downloaded, it's successfully downloaded the file. It's downloading the cached version, and same with the CSS, okay? So it's working and doing its job. The CSRF tokens, just because we haven't added a CSRF token onto our project yet, that's a different error. but that has nothing to do with with Laravel Mix. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense, guys. This is, you're going to want to be using these Laravel mixes if you're doing anything with versions. And I do recommend doing versions, at least on production. When I'm doing something in development, I won't worry about this. It's just kind of unnecessary. I'll just do this. But then when you move something into production and you're working in a production site, it's really easy. Just add .version to it. And then I always, even in development, I still use these mix commands now. I've started using these mix commands instead of asset. They do the same thing, but it keeps track of those version numbers, okay? And then the other thing you can do is you can do .source maps, which I was showing you earlier. And then the source maps. Okay, so just want to show you guys all that stuff. And I hope you guys are able to fit this into your workflow. I think there's a lot of huge benefits for any developer to take advantage of these pre-processing and stuff like that. So hopefully you guys do take advantage of that. And if you guys are having any questions, make sure to leave a comment below and you guys can help each other out if you guys run into any problems with these. I will link in the description, I will link to the documentation for Laravel Mix if you guys want to read up on it a little bit more. And maybe you can catch something that I didn't do in the video. But I wanted to go over, these are basically all the main features, at least that I'm aware of, with Laravel Mix. So if there's something out there I missed, just go ahead and let me know, and maybe we'll do a follow-up video. But this is going to be Laravel Mix, and we'll dive into a new feature in the next video.